On the evening of December 7, 1941, the phone rang in the Wolf's Lair, Hitler's secluded headquarters deep in the forests of East Prussia. The news that came across the line was confusing at first, then exhilarating and finally, terrifyingly consequential. Japan had attacked the United States Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. For the German leadership, this was a complete surprise. Despite their alliance, Tokyo had kept Berlin in the dark about the operation. Suddenly, the global chessboard had been flipped over. If you enjoy uncovering the moments where arrogance blinds leaders to reality, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter of history. To understand why the subsequent days were the turning point of the entire 20th century, we have to look at the state of the war in late 1941. The German Wehrmacht was stalled outside Moscow, freezing in temperatures that cracked engine blocks and froze men to death. The Blitzkrieg had hit a brick wall. Great Britain, though battered, was still fighting and receiving massive amounts of supplies across the Atlantic. Germany was already stretched to its absolute limit, fighting a colossal land war in the east and a naval and air war in the west. Logic would dictate that the last thing Hitler needed was another enemy, especially one with the industrial capacity of the United States. However, the mood in the Nazi high command wasn't one of apprehension. It was one of relief. For months, Hitler had been frustrated by the undeclared war in the Atlantic. President Roosevelt had ordered the U.S. Navy to shoot on sight any German U-boats found protecting convoys bound for Britain. Hitler felt constrained. He wanted to unleash his submarines to strangle Britain, but he had held back to avoid provoking America into an open conflict too soon. Now, with Japan's attack, he felt the shackles had been removed. He viewed the Japanese as a warrior nation, an honorary Aryan ally that would tie down the Americans in the Pacific for years, leaving Germany free to finish off Europe. In the corridors of the Foreign Office in Berlin, panic was setting in. Joachim von Ribbentrop, the foreign minister, frantically checked the text of the Tripartite Pact. He realized something critical. Germany was under no obligation to join the war. The treaty only required Germany to assist Japan if Japan was attacked by a power not currently involved in the European war. Since Japan had been the aggressor at Pearl Harbor, Germany could technically remain neutral. Ribbentrop urged caution. He knew, perhaps better than Hitler, that the American economy was a juggernaut. But Hitler ignored the fine print. He operated on instinct, on a sense of providence. He believed that fate had delivered this moment. He told his generals that Germany had never lost a war when it was allied with Japan. He overestimated the damage done at Pearl Harbor, believing the U.S. Navy was crippled. He underestimated the American national character, viewing the U.S. as a Mongol nation, a decadent society of mixed races, and consumerism that would not have the stomach for a long, bloody war. This racial arrogance was about to become his tombstone. For 4 days, from December 7th to December 11th, the world held its breath. Roosevelt declared war on Japan, but curiously, he did not declare war on Germany. The American public was furious at Japan, but many were still isolationists regarding Europe. Roosevelt knew he needed to fight Germany to save Britain, but he couldn't make the first move without dividing his country. He needed Hitler to declare war on him. And Hitler, driven by hubris and a fatal miscalculation of global power dynamics, was preparing to give Roosevelt exactly what he wanted. The atmosphere in the Kroll Opera House in Berlin on December 11, 1941, was electric, but underneath the cheers, there was a current of dread among the military professionals. They knew the statistics. They knew that by bringing the United States into the conflict, the war had just transitioned from a European conquest to a world war they could not win mathematically. But the man at the podium didn't care about mathematics. Before we dissect the speech that signed the Third Reich's death warrant, hit that like button to support deep historical analysis. At 3 p.m., Adolf Hitler took the stage. His speech was long, rambling, and filled with venom. He spent nearly 90 minutes rewriting history, blaming the Jews, the British, and President Roosevelt for the world's ills. He listed every perceived slight the United States had committed against Germany. He accused Roosevelt of being a mentally ill gangster surrounded by Jewish advisors. It was a speech born of deep insecurity and a desperate need to appear strong. Then he dropped the bombshell. He announced that he had handed the American charge d'affaires his passport. Germany was formally declaring war on the United States of America. The deputies in the Reichstag cheered wildly, unaware that they were cheering for their own destruction. In Washington, FDR received the news with a grim sense of satisfaction. The Germany First strategy, which he had secretly agreed upon with Churchill, could now be implemented openly. Hitler had solved Roosevelt's greatest political problem. Why did he do it? Historians have debated this for decades. It wasn't just madness. It was a gamble, a Flucht nach vorn, a flight forward. Hitler realized that the war in Russia was not going to end quickly. He knew that American supplies were the only thing keeping Britain and the Soviets alive. He believed that by unleashing the U-boats in an unrestricted campaign against American shipping, he could cut the supply lines before the American military could fully mobilize. He was betting that the Japanese Navy would dominate the Pacific, forcing the U.S. to send all its resources west, leaving the Atlantic exposed. He failed to understand the sheer scale of the American economy. He didn't realize that the United States could build two separate navies, one to crush Japan and one to dominate the Atlantic, and still have enough resources left over to arm the Soviet Union and Britain. This decision also fundamentally altered the morale of his enemies. Until that moment, the British were fighting for survival, unsure if they could ever actually invade the continent and defeat the Wehrmacht. The moment the U.S. joined, Churchill slept soundly for the first time in months. He knew the end was inevitable. We have won the war, he thought. It might take years, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The industrial potential of the Allies was now nearly 5 times that of the Axis. Germany was now at war with the British Empire, the Soviet Union, and the United States simultaneously. It was the ultimate nightmare scenario that Bismarck and the Kaiser had feared, a complete encirclement by superior powers. Yet, Hitler walked into it voluntarily. He viewed it as a clash of civilizations, a final battle between the young, vibrant Axis nations and the old, decaying democracies. He was blinded by his own propaganda, unable to see that the decadent Americans were experts in mass production, engineering, and logistics, the very things that win modern wars. When Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto of Japan heard about the success of Pearl Harbor, he famously worried that they had awakened a sleeping giant. Hitler, conversely, thought the giant was in a coma. He dismissed the United States as a country of razor blades and radios, incapable of producing high-quality military hardware. He was about to learn a lesson in industrial warfare that would cost millions of lives. Make sure you're subscribed to our channel as we explore how the American factory floor defeated the German battlefield genius. In 1941, the United States Army was smaller than the Army of Portugal. Its soldiers were training with wooden rifles. Its tanks were obsolete. To the German observer, it looked pathetic, but the potential energy was staggering. Within months of the declaration of war, the American economy underwent the most rapid transformation in economic history. President Roosevelt set targets that seemed insane. He called for production of 60,000 aircraft in 1942 and 125,000 in 1943. The Germans laughed. They didn't think it was possible. They were wrong. The U.S. automotive industry stopped making cars almost overnight. Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler retooled their massive assembly lines to build tanks, bomber engines, and Jeeps. The numbers are mind-bending. During the war, the United States produced nearly 300,000 aircraft, 86,000 tanks, and 2 million trucks. By comparison, Germany produced about 46,000 tanks. The sheer volume of material meant that for every Tiger tank the Germans could field, a masterpiece of engineering that took thousands of man-hours to build, the Americans could field 10 Sherman tanks. The Shermans weren't better, but there were simply too many of them. Hitler's decision brought the victory program into full effect. It wasn't just weapons, it was logistics. The U.S. produced Liberty ships, cargo vessels that were ugly and slow, but could be welded together in weeks. At the height of production, a new ship was entering the water every single day. Germany could sink ships fast, but they couldn't sink them faster than America could build them. This economic disparity meant that Germany was fighting a war of scarcity, while the Allies were fighting a war of abundance. German generals on the Eastern Front began to notice a disturbing trend. The Soviet troops they were fighting were eating American Spam, driving American Studebaker trucks, and communicating on American radios. The decision to declare war on the U.S. didn't just open a Western Front. It strengthened the Eastern Front. Hitler had banked on quality over quantity. He believed the superior German soldier and the superior German tank would always win. But he forgot that quantity has a quality all its own. The American strategy was not to outmaneuver the Germans, but to overwhelm them, to bury them under an avalanche of steel and explosives. By declaring war, Hitler allowed this avalanche to start sliding. Furthermore, the American entry brought a new kind of management to the war. The U.S. was run by corporate executives and logistics experts who understood supply chains. Germany was run by sycophants and ideologues who understood political maneuvering. The efficiency gap was massive. While German factories were still using slave labor and batch production methods, American factories were using continuous flow production. The decision to fight this industrial monster was, in retrospect, an act of national suicide. For a few terrifying months in early 1942, it seemed like Hitler's gamble might actually pay off. The German U-boat fleet, commanded by Admiral Karl Donitz, launched Operation Drumbeat. They crossed the Atlantic and found the American coast virtually undefended. What followed was a slaughter that the U-boat crews called the Second Happy Time. If you enjoy naval history, don't forget to hit the bell icon to get updates on our upcoming series about the Battle of the Atlantic. Donitz sent only a handful of Type 9 U-boats to the American East Coast, but they found a paradise of targets. The American cities refused to enforce blackouts because it would hurt tourism. The skylines of New York, Atlantic City, and Miami were blazing with light, silhouetting the merchant ships for the German periscopes. The U-boats sat on the bottom during the day and surfaced at night to sink ships at will. Tourists on Florida beaches literally watched tankers burning offshore. In the first 6 months of 1942, German submarines sank nearly 400 ships in American waters. It was a tactical massacre. The loss of tonnage was astronomical. For a moment, it looked like the supply line to Britain would be severed. Hitler was ecstatic. He awarded medals and proclaimed that the American house of cards was collapsing. But this success was a mirage. It was a tactical victory that obscured a strategic disaster. The slaughter off the coast woke the Americans up. They quickly adopted the convoy system. They implemented blackouts. And crucially, they poured resources into anti-submarine warfare technology that Germany couldn't match. The Americans and British developed centimetric radar, which could detect a submarine periscope from miles away, even at night and through fog. They deployed long-range B-24 Liberator bombers to close the air gap in the mid-Atlantic. They cracked the German naval Enigma code. By mid-1943, the hunter became the hunted. The U-boats were being slaughtered. Donitz lost his son in the Atlantic. The gray wolves were being tracked by technology and overwhelmed by numbers. For every U-boat Germany built, the Allies built 5 destroyers. The decision to declare war had opened up the Atlantic front, but Germany lacked the surface navy to contest it. They were relying entirely on a submarine force that, while brave and skilled, was technologically stagnant compared to the rapid Allied advances. Hitler had started a naval war against the world's 2 greatest naval powers, Britain and the U.S., without a single aircraft carrier and with a surface fleet that was largely trapped in port. This failure at sea meant that the buildup of American troops in Britain could proceed unhindered. Millions of GIs, thousands of tanks, and mountains of supplies were ferried across the ocean. The Atlantic Ocean, which Hitler hoped would be a barrier, became a highway, and at the end of that highway lay the fortress of Europe, waiting to be stormed. The most visible and devastating consequence of Hitler's declaration of war arrived not on the sea, but in the sky. By 1943, the sky over Germany turned black, not with storm clouds, but with B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 Liberators. The United States Army Air Force had arrived, and they brought a strategy of daylight precision bombing that would turn the Third Reich into rubble. Subscribe now to join our community as we analyze the air war that broke the Luftwaffe. Before the Americans arrived, the British RAF bombed by night. It was inaccurate, a terror weapon designed to dehouse workers. But the Americans wanted to destroy the German war economy. They flew by day in massive formations called combat boxes, bristling with machine guns. Hitler had promised the German people that enemy planes would never fly over the Reich. Now, in 1943 and 1944, thousands of American bombers were blotting out the sun. They targeted the ball-bearing factories, the aircraft assembly plants, and most critically, the synthetic oil refineries. The decision to bring America into the war meant that the Luftwaffe had to fight a war of attrition it could not win. To defend the cities, Germany had to pull its fighter squadrons from the Eastern Front. This gave the Soviets air superiority in the East, allowing their tanks to smash through German lines. It was a domino effect. Every Messerschmitt Bf 109 shot down over Berlin was one less protecting the soldiers at Stalingrad or Kursk. The sheer numbers were overwhelming. In Big Week, in early 1944, the Americans baited the Luftwaffe into a massive air battle. They lost hundreds of bombers, but they could replace them. The Germans lost hundreds of experienced pilots, whom they could not replace. The Luftwaffe ceased to be an effective fighting force. This air superiority laid the groundwork for D-Day. When the Allies landed in Normandy, they owned the sky. German tanks couldn't move by day without being destroyed by American fighter bombers. The oil campaign grounded the Wehrmacht. By late 1944, German tanks were being abandoned on the battlefield not because they were destroyed, but because they had run out of gas. This was a direct result of fighting a superpower with unlimited oil reserves and industrial capacity. The German decision to antagonize the U.S. ensured that the home front became a front line. The cities of Hamburg, Dresden, Berlin, and Cologne were reduced to hollow shells. The social fabric of Germany disintegrated under the rain of bombs. Hitler had hoped the Americans would be too distracted by Japan. Instead, the U.S. adopted a Germany-first policy. They sent just enough to the Pacific to hold the line, while throwing the bulk of their fury at Hitler. He had picked a fight with Giant, hoping the Giant would be looking the other way. Instead, the Giant stared him straight in the eyes and crushed him. In the spring of 1945, American tanks crossed the Rhine River. At the same time, the Red Army was storming the gates of Berlin. The Third Reich, which was supposed to last 1,000 years, had burned to the ground in 12. The decision made on December 11, 1941, had run its terrible course. As we conclude this tragedy of hubris, please verify that you are subscribed. It helps us keep producing high-quality history documentaries. The meeting of American and Soviet troops at the Elbe River was a final symbolic nail in the coffin. It represented the crushing of Germany between the two superpowers Hitler had provoked. The recovery from this decision was impossible from the moment it was made. Looking back, military historians often ask, could Germany have won if they hadn't declared war on the U.S.? It's a haunting what if the U.S. had stayed out of the European theater, concentrating only on Japan, Britain might have been isolated. The Soviet Union might have fallen without the massive influx of American Lend-Lease trucks and radios. The D-Day invasion might never have happened. Germany could have consolidated its hold on Europe. But by declaring war, Hitler guaranteed that the combined GDP of the Allied powers was so much larger than the Axis that defeat was a mathematical certainty. He turned a difficult war into an impossible one. The psychological impact on the German leadership in the final days was telling. In the bunker, as the end neared, they didn't talk about the British or the French. They talked about the endless waves of American material. They realized too late that their ideological view of the world triumphs over economics, was a fantasy. The legacy of this decision is the total destruction of Germany as a political entity for 40 years. The country was partitioned, occupied, and rebuilt in the image of its conquerors. The West became Americanized. The East became Sovietized. The decision that Germany could never recover from didn't just lose a war, it erased the old Germany from a map. In the end, the declaration of war on the United States stands as the ultimate example of dictator trap. Surrounded by yes-men, isolated from reality, and high on his own propaganda, Adolf Hitler committed the greatest unforced error in military history. He bet everything on a quick knockout that never came, and in doing so, he ensured that the sleeping giant would not just wake up, but would tear his empire apart, brick by brick. Thank you for watching this series on the strategic failures of the Third Reich. If you want to understand how the Japanese made a similar mistake at Midway, click the video on your screen now. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share history with the world.